Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. As you're listening to this, I will be currently on my way to Mallorca, which is very exciting. And I am recording this obviously in advance. So it is 2 weeks before at the moment, but I am already in holiday prep mode. I haven't been away in about a year. Last time it was when I went to Madeira with my boyfriend, and I'm just craving some sun. I think now the sun's starting to come out again in the UK. I'm like, how did we get through that winter? That was a long, dark, dreary winter, and I just always feel like a new person when the sun comes out. I don't know if you feel the same. But this holiday is extra special because it's actually a retreat, and it's the first retreat that I've ever done. I've done the odd workshop day here and there, and obviously lots of personal development work before, but this is a specific manifestation retreat just outside of Palma in Mallorca, and this is a place I've never been to before. I've been to Spain and Portugal, and I've been to Tenerife and some of the other islands, but never Mallorca. And Palma looks gorgeous, so I am flying in a day or two before the actual retreat starts and staying in the city, and then I'll be traveling there. We stay there. There's like a private chef. It looks like such a vibe, and it's all on manifestation. So I am going to share my experience when I get back, any takeaways and lessons learned. I'm sure there's going to be a ton. This is quite an intensive experience. It involves things like breath work and stepping into your future self. So who knows, I might be a completely different person when I come back. It's more likely I'll be the best version of myself. And it just sounds right up my street. So I will do a podcast episode in a couple of weeks sharing all about that you can get excited for. But today's podcast, I'm sharing a masterclass that I actually did, well, part of a masterclass that I did with my one-to-one clients in November 2023 on metabolic health. And I was doing these 90-minute group coaching calls for a long time with my clients every quarter. And we covered so many subjects over the years, like menstrual cycle and fertility awareness methods, subconscious mind, manifestation, sleep quality, how to get the best sleep of your life. And clients would technically, up until now, just get access to 2 live group calls within the 6-month package. But with my brand new package, you will get access to all of the replays that I've done in the past. So everyone who is already in my root cause relief package, I think this means that you signed up from from January 2023 onwards, then you'll get access to this accompanying course too, which is filled not only with these deep dive videos and masterclasses, but so many other supportive tools, including a library of meditations, hypnosis, subconscious reprogramming audios, which will only grow over time, how to identify and break through limiting beliefs, how to navigate detox reactions during any healing protocols that you're doing, how to do a coffee enema for liver detox. I've got videos on mold, lab tests, mineral balancing. I really have pulled the best from all of my other courses and have created brand new content as well, especially for this. If this sounds like something that you're interested in, then you will get complimentary access to this accompanying course when you sign up to my 6-month one-to-one package. As this is something you'll get lifetime access to, and I will continue to add to it over time, I really don't want you to miss it. It really is my life's work all in one place. My 10 years experience now in the health and wellness world, everything that I know, and anything new that I will learn, because things change and adapt over time and my experience grows, I will continue to add to this program. Today's podcast episode is just a clip from one of the videos that you'll get access to, showing the importance of blood sugar regulation, what exactly is insulin resistance, and what should be happening when we eat sugar and glucose, some signs of imbalance. The full video is actually very long, it's 90 minutes. So this is just the first 50 minutes today. And then if you want to hear the rest, where I actually start to go into solutions, answer your questions, then you will need to watch the full video. The link in my bio will take you to the sign up page. You can book in an enrollment call if you want to chat first, a 30-minute enrollment call, which is £40. If you then go to sign up to the one-to-one, that £40 will be deducted. Or there is just an application on the website. If you're just happy to go ahead, just fill out a form, I'll review that. And then if it's a good fit on my end, then you can sign up and get started. We will also in that package, be working on your unique imbalances too through the coaching sessions and your personalized plan. So not only do you get all of this information, you then get how to apply it in your personal lifestyle and routines with the one-to-one coaching. So I hope you enjoy this podcast episode. I'll check in just towards the end as an outro, but for now, let's talk all about metabolic health and what is going on when we have metabolic dysfunction, some signs of that, and yeah, what should be happening in a healthy body. Let's get into it. This is another big passion of mine. So the subjects that I'm trying to choose on these calls is something general enough that everyone can benefit. So this is the classic one. So far we've done things like mindset, we've done one on fertility awareness, we've done one on last time manifestation, and this time metabolism. So this encompasses a few things: blood sugar management, insulin regulation, your weight, your thyroid, your mitochondria, and also your, what was the other one? Your muscle. So like muscle mass, fitness, it all kind of comes into one. And it's a real big passion of mine. And this is because I started off my practice specializing in hormone health. So fertility, periods, and I very quickly learned how important metabolism is too. And I was always put off by the term metabolism because I thought it was very fitness world and eating a lot of food and being really skinny and doing sports nutrition and all of that. So I was kind of put off, but that's not exactly what metabolism is. So I'll share what true metabolic health is, and what you're going to learn today are signs of imbalance, foundations of blood sugar control and metabolism. So what actually happens in our body when we eat? How does the food turn into energy? And what are the different systems and factors involved? Why it's so important for overall health, and how it's connected to pretty much every body system, because the body doesn't function in isolation. But I've chose a few specific symptoms and systems that most of you guys are going to be struggling with, and how to improve your metabolic health. So we've got some nutrition tips, lifestyle, and general like resources, recommendations, podcasts to listen to towards the end, and then Q&A. So yeah, write questions as you go, and if I've not covered them at the end, I will be sure to answer them. So the definition of metabolism is the chemical process of converting food into energy. So it doesn't matter if you're really lean and skinny, you can still have metabolic problems. And even if you're on like the heavier side, if you're carrying a little bit more body fat, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a completely unhealthy metabolism. So I see that all the time. People are like, oh, I mustn't have any issues with my blood sugar because I'm really skinny. If anything, I struggle to put on weights and put on muscle, but that is still a messed up metabolism. So things like your mitochondria are involved. If you don't know what mitochondria are, these are the energy powerhouses of the cells. So this is where that food to fuel conversion takes place. So it obviously matters what food you're putting in, but if you're putting in perfect organic nutrient-dense food, but you have an issue with your mitochondria, actually then taking that food and converting it into energy, you can see why so many of us have had health issues. Like, we're eating good diets. It's not like we're eating McDonald's every meal, but we're still struggling with energy production. And when I talk about energy production, it doesn't just mean whether you're tired or not, or whether you can get out of bed or not. Cellular energy is what we need to do everything. We need it to heal, repair. We need it to produce healthy, happy brain chemicals. We need it to ovulate and therefore have a good, healthy menstrual cycle and fertility. We need it to digest our food. We need it to detox. So that term energy is really important. People, sometimes they don't think that they have an energy production issue because they don't struggle with fatigue as their number one symptom. They aren't in bed with chronic fatigue, so they think my energy's fine, or maybe my energy was really bad 5 years ago and in comparison it's not too bad, but it's still not that they have this like really thriving, robust energy that we need for everything. So the mitochondria is involved. The thyroid gland is involved, which we'll talk a little bit more about. This is the gland that's located in your neck, and it's your master metabolic gland. And this governs the speed of your metabolism. So the thyroid kind of controls the mitochondria, and they work in tandem at how fast these little factories are. If you imagine the mitochondria as these little factories in every cell, it's like the thyroid is the CEO of the company. And he's like, right, work harder in this area, do this faster, let's hire more people. So everything works in synergy. And these are just some signs of imbalance. So we've got weight fluctuations. This is a classic one, and it can go either way. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're gaining weight. It could be that you're underweight and struggling to put on weight, struggling to put on muscle, but definitely putting on weight or not able to lose the weight. And especially if you're storing excess belly fat, this is a very classic sign of blood sugar, insulin, metabolic imbalances. And it's because your abdomen has more insulin receptors. It also has more cortisol receptors, I think 4 times as much as other places. And if you think about it evolutionarily, this like abdomen area is one of the most important places of the body. If you were in a battle, if you were in a war, a lot of your vital organs are in the center of your body. So if you are under threat, if you're under danger, if something's seriously wrong, you pack on the extra pounds in that area to protect your vital organs. So even though we're not in these wars anymore, we're not having this physical threat to us every other day, it's more psychological, perceived stress, the body still functions in the same way as it would have done thousands of years ago. So we've got weight fluctuations, we've got excessive or lack of appetite. That can swing either way as well. Some people, they have to literally force themselves to eat. And a big one is breakfast. So if you wake up and you're not hungry, that's a sign that your metabolism's out of whack. You shouldn't be almost passing out and you're going to faint, but you should have like a nice robust hunger signal first thing in the morning. And even between meals, you should be able to go good like 3 to 6 hours between meals. Sometimes we don't want to leave it that long. But yeah, you should be able to go 3 to 6 meals, 3 to 6 hours without eating a meal and be fine. If you're going 3 hours and you feel like you're going to pass out again, you're really hungry, you're shaky, you like bite someone's head off because you're so hungry, then that is a sign of imbalance. But also, if you can go literally the whole day without food and be fine, that's not a good sign either. So a nice, healthy appetite is good, but when that goes away, that can also be a problem. Feeling hungry, so that's hunger and angry all mixed into one, or you might feel really irritable. You might get like really snappy when someone asks you to do something and it's lunchtime. Energy crashes, so if you have this like 4 p.m. dip, or after a meal you get a crash of energy, it feels like you need a nap. Exemption of this would be something like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. If you've eaten a lot of food and it's also like very cozy and maybe you've had a long day, that's pretty normal, but that's not normal to be experiencing every day. Like if you're having your lunch at work and then it feels like you need like another hour's break just to have a little catch up of your energy, then that's not normal. Mood swings, it could happen day to day. Like 1 minute you could be absolutely fine, the next minute you feel really anxious, you feel really emotional, you feel really triggered. And especially premenstrually, if you get the mood swings before your period, that could be a sign of blood sugar imbalances and metabolic issues the whole month prior. So it doesn't necessarily matter what you're doing that week, that PMS week, because it's an average of everything that you've done for the month prior. So there are little things that you can do in that week to help your mood and make sure your blood sugar is really regulated on that week. But if the whole rest of the month you aren't eating on a regular basis, your metabolism's really messed up, then you're not going to be able to change it like so dramatically. Sex hormone imbalances are another sign of metabolic dysfunction. So sex hormone imbalances are things like estrogen dominance, progesterone deficiency, PCOS and high testosterone levels, fertility issues, period problems, irregular cycles, missing periods, all of that. Thyroid irregularities are another one. So this may be diagnosed level or just like preclinical diagnosis. So it's not at the point where you need medication, but it's definitely not optimal ranges. And low muscle mass is another one. So you might be exercising more than ever, but you are just really struggling to gain muscle. So you feel more of that flabby feeling, where you used to like have a bit more shape about you, but now everything's just kind of like podgy. That can be low muscle mass. Or you yeah, maybe last year you could lift heavier than you do now, and now it's a real struggle. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of imbalances together. So it's usually high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high glucose. So you might have one or multiple of those. That's basically metabolic syndrome. And it can also affect your skin when your metabolism is out of whack, leading to breakouts. And things like skin tags very commonly are insulin resistance and high blood sugar for too long. And this dark patches of skin is called acanthosis nigricans. A very, very wordy diagnosis. But the skin, it usually affects like the folds of the body, and it can affect like the armpits and the groin area, or sometimes the neck. It can go a little bit darker and more velvety texture. It can like thicken a little bit. And this is common in PCOS, and individuals with like darker skin tones, it's much more obvious. Some people think, I actually had this. My mum always used to say like, oh, you feel like your neck's like quite dirty. She's like, are you making sure that when you're taking your makeup off, you're washing your neck? I'm like, how rude, this is my skin. And it was just that I was developing, well, I had insulin resistance at the time, and luckily now it's cleared up, and these things can absolutely change. Like none of these are set in stone. All of these can be reversed, by the way. But yeah, it just shows how many parts of the body it can affect. So I've mentioned like pretty much every system of the body here, and think of all of the problems that go alongside these too. So with the weight fluctuations, you might also deal with cellulite and stretch marks. With the energy crashes, you might also have like issues with blood flow. You might also be feeling really cold all the time. With the sex hormone imbalances, as I mentioned, you might have really heavy periods. With the thyroid irregularities, you might struggle with headaches. So they all have their own within them set of symptoms too. Okay, so onto the science. So what is actually going on when we eat, and what should be going on? So this is just an ideal like graph here. This isn't from like an app or anything. Someone's just basically made this, and I've just copied it. So this is credit to NutriSense, the website that I got this from. So the green band in the middle is the optimal reference range for how we want our blood sugar to be like fluctuating throughout the day. The ideal would be a nice wave throughout the day. So it should go up when we eat, because that's what we're doing. We're eating food, and it's either giving us glucose directly, or it's then converting into glucose. So I'm going to throw this, probably interchange the words glucose, blood sugar, and carbohydrates. So we get carbohydrates from our food, and then that converts into glucose/sugar. Or we can eat sugar directly, and obviously stays as sugar. So we should be on this nice wave throughout the day. It's very gentle, and it goes down before we eat. So that's what signals hunger, or should do. So our blood sugar drops slightly. That triggers us to have an appetite and eat our meal. And then after eating, it should come up slightly, and then it goes down again after a few hours. Whereas most people are on this spike and crash. So it's more like a roller coaster than a wave. And these things can be caused by improper meal combining. So if you're eating a meal and the majority of it is carbohydrates or sugar, so things like pasta and bread and potatoes, if the majority of it is that, and then so like you're having pasta with just a little bit of chicken on there, like a tiny amount of chicken, then you're going to get this huge spike of glucose. So your blood sugar elevates, and then what comes up must come down. So then what your body does when you have glucose in the system is produce insulin. So I've got an entire slide next on insulin, just to clarify a bit further. But when it goes too high, you are then going to get a big crash of glucose shortly thereafter. So then you see it goes up, and then it comes down way too low this time though. So it goes past the normal range and it drops too low. And then this is where we get cravings or an energy crash. So then we think like 2 hours later after that big bowl of pasta, I'm hungry again. Let's have a chocolate bar, or I really need a coffee because my energy's crashed and I need something to pick me up. So then you have a cup of coffee and a biscuit. So then you go back up, and then you come down again, and then you're up, and then you're down, and this continues on even into the night. So this is how sleep issues also come into play, because even when you're not eating at night, your blood sugar is still going to be on that roller coaster because of what you did in the day. So you could be doing all of the sleep hygiene things in the world. So that's things like blue light blocking glasses and reading a book and drinking your herbal tea. But if you've been on a complete blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day, that isn't really going to work. So some other things that can cause this spike. So improper meal combining. So maybe you're not eating enough protein, maybe it's too many carbs, maybe there's not enough fiber in the meal. Caffeine, especially coffee, can also spike your blood sugar because of the huge connection with stress. So stress in itself, whether it's stress from your thoughts or it's stress from something like caffeine, stimulants, that's going to spike your blood sugar too. So I've done experiments when I've worn a glucose monitor, which I'll talk about shortly. And I've just been like sat on my sofa, blood sugar's fine. And then I like purposely think about something stressful. So I'll like hype myself up and start worrying about something. And I can see in real time my blood sugar levels rising. And it's insane. So I've not even eaten anything. And when we're stressed, our body can produce its own sugar, or it can start to mobilize the sugars from our stores. So we have things called, it's called a glycogen store. Again, I'll talk about that more shortly. But this is also an evolutionary like phenomenon. So back in the day when we would have been like running from a saber-toothed tiger, if we had not eaten for 8 hours because there's not food readily, it wasn't like there's food readily available constantly back then, our body would have had to mobilize sugars and create its own sugar in that moment to allow us to run. So if we had like low blood sugar, our body would force ourselves to make sugar so that we had energy to fight, flight, or freeze. Well, pretty much fight and flight. So that process is called gluconeogenesis. So basically the creation of blood sugar from your own body's tissues. So that's needed process. That's not a bad thing. So it's like that's why we can go a long time overnight without food, because if our blood sugar drops too low, gluconeogenesis can kick in and then we have that reserve of sugar ready to go. But that shouldn't be happening like every day. That should happen as like a backup thing when needed. Or if we really have to go 4 days without food, we could survive because of gluconeogenesis. But that's quite a draining process for the body that requires a lot of nutrients and resources. So stress spikes that blood sugar despite what you're eating. Caffeine spikes the blood sugar too. I'd say they were the main things. And then when we get this crash, this is very stressful to the body. So blood sugar crashing, the body thinks that it's going to die. It's very dramatic. So it thinks, my blood sugar's low, I'm going to die. Let's either like ask this person to eat more sugar. So it'll give you a little while to get some more sugar. If not, it will make its own blood sugar. But that's been triggered by a danger response. So I think emergency, let's produce sugar. And then again, it spikes you too high and you crash again. And then that spike, this is inflammatory to the body. So the crash is stressful. The spike is inflammatory to the body. Because when we have high blood sugar for too long, it can cause a lot of damage to our arteries, our blood vessels, our brain. It kind of like, imagine little crystals of sugar in the bloodstream for too long. It's not exactly like that, but it's quite inflammatory to the body. And this is where we end up with fat storage, and we just end up in this more inflammatory state, and we're just on this roller coaster up and down. So these spikes and crashes, which cause stress and inflammation, these two things are the biggest drivers of health issues. Stress and inflammation are tied to every condition, whether it's autoimmune disease, whether it's cancer, diabetes, PCOS, PMS, endometriosis, stress and inflammation. So you can see how regulating the blood sugar, we can massively reduce our inflammation and our stress just from making sure that our blood sugar's on a nice, like, even keel throughout the day. So next slide, this is showing how insulin works. I know it looks a little bit like complex to see, but if you imagine, so the first one, imagine that little purple triangle, that's a key going into a door. So you can see on the right, it's gone into the lock and it's turning and it's allowing that pink glucose into the cell. And then inside that cell is the mitochondria, the factory, the battery, that takes that glucose and converts it into fuel, and then we have energy in our cells. Does that make sense? Kind of, yeah. So it's like a lock and key analogy. So insulin is the key that opens the door and allows glucose into the cell. If our insulin isn't working, or if the lock is damaged or broken, then you can see how that glucose isn't allowed inside the cell, or it can't get into the cell. So when that happens, we end up with high blood sugar, and the body hates that. The body loves, it's like Goldilocks, not too much, not too little, just right in terms of blood sugar. We should be staying in this nice range throughout the day. So if our blood sugar is too high for too long, our body kicks in and it sends out more insulin. So it sends out more keys, and it's just throwing keys at it to try and get one that fits that lock. It's like, must be one of these, must be one of these. But that high insulin is also problematic. So insulin's not the bad guy. We do need insulin, and you can see how it's important to allow our cells to feed and get that energy. But more insulin is another thing that's very inflammatory. And this process where we have high blood sugar and high insulin constantly, because something's going on, something's interfering with that process, that's called insulin resistance. So it's like our cells are numb to the insulin. They just need more and more and more insulin to try and get that sugar in. The body's shoving more and more keys, more and more insulin at it to try and get that glucose into a cell. So once our cells have fed, like our cells are nice and happy and fed, if there's still too much glucose left over, because maybe we've eaten too much or we're just producing too much glucose, next the glucose fills up glycogen stores. So this is like our backup reserves, which fuels us when we're not eating, when we're fasting. So glycogen isn't necessarily bad. We tap into that during exercise as well. So once we've burned through the sugar in our bloodstream, if there's nothing left and we're doing like a marathon race or something, we then burn through our glycogen stores too. So it's like the backup reserve. But then a lot of people are also, so they're filling up the cells, they're filling up their glycogen stores, and they're also filling up, those things are full, they start to fill up the liver. And this is where it becomes a problem, because the liver shouldn't really have glucose and sugar in there. Because when the liver has glucose and sugar, it converts it into a fat, which are called triglycerides, and that's not good. So it's fine to fill up our glycogen, but that overflow, that overspill, that is very inflammatory, and that shouldn't really be happening. And when we have this high blood sugar, high triglycerides, high insulin, this is a risk factor for things like heart disease, stroke, and even Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's was actually, so this like dementia states, this what they're called, neurodegenerative, it's like brain degeneration. Alzheimer's was actually described as type 3 diabetes a few years ago. So type 1, just to clarify as well, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. A lot of people develop it in childhood, and it's when there's an autoimmune attack on the pancreas that produces insulin. So that's kind of like an autoimmune disease. They just don't produce insulin, so they have to inject it at meal times. Type 2 diabetes is typically lifestyle driven. So people develop it when they're older, and it's usually driven by poor diets or sedentary lifestyle, smoking, alcohol, junk food, all of that. And this is when they've had that insulin resistance for so long that sometimes they do actually need to inject insulin. It's like the body has given up on producing insulin, because it's like, I've done this for so long, I've produced so much, and the body's obviously not working, so I'm just going to give out on it. But that's not an autoimmune disease. And then insulin resistance I've just described. So Alzheimer's was described as type 3 diabetes, so a new form of diabetes, because the brain is no longer getting the glucose that it needs. So it's like the brain has become insulin resistant too. And the brain runs primarily off glucose. And it's one of the highest, it has one of the highest requirements for glucose as well. So that's how when your blood sugar drops, your brain can be affected and you can really struggle to concentrate. Some people pass out because the brain just isn't getting fed properly. So with type 3 diabetes, over time, the brain is just getting less and less nutrients and energy and food, and then parts of it start to die off. So that's how that can develop. And then in terms of testing, so there's not just one test that we do to see what's going on. There's a few different things. And I've not put the optimal ranges on here because that depends on a few factors. It depends what country you're in, what units it's been tested in, and a few other things like age and gender. So I haven't included those, but I would recommend testing yearly if possible, and also when you're feeling good. So in future, when you're thriving, when you're doing amazingly, and you aren't doing as many lab tests in general, as many supplements, I would still recommend testing when you're feeling good, because then you get to see what your healthy levels are. Because when you're struggling with health issues, that's obviously not where you want them to be, but how are you ever going to know what your healthy good levels are if you never test when you're in a good place? So I know it's obviously an expense for a lot of you, but it's really worth it if you can do that. And also, on the other hand, even if you feel the exact same month to month, year to year, still test. So if you this year are struggling with your energy and your weight, and next year you feel the exact same, that won't be happening with us a lot, but just in general, then you might just think, what's the point in me testing because I feel the same? I've not seen any improvement, so why should I spend a few £100 on testing when there's no point? But you might actually see a difference. You might see that your fasting insulin or your fasting glucose has actually started to come down, which would give you motivation and would actually show you that you are healing. And this applies to other tests as well. So like a hormone test or vitamin D or anything like that. Or it could be that your symptoms are now due to something different. So maybe you have fixed that fasting glucose and insulin problem that you had previously. Maybe now you have a B12 deficiency. That's what's causing the fatigue. So you can see how testing is actually really useful either way, whether you're feeling good or not. So blood sugar metabolic markers, fasting glucose and fasting insulin are useful, but also postprandial glucose and insulin. Not a lot of doctors would test this. Usually it's during pregnancy. They do the oral glucose tolerance test, where they drink the sugar syrup, test it 1 hour, 2 hours after eating. But just for general people who aren't pregnant, they're probably not going to test this. But you can test your postprandial glucose yourself using like a continuous glucose monitor, CGM, or a finger prick test. So I'll show my favorite one a bit later. HbA1c is hemoglobin A1c. So this is an average glucose reading. So it's actually more accurate because some individuals with diabetes and blood sugar, like they're being tracked by their doctor, they purposely don't eat a lot of sugar before the annual check-in. So for a few days before, they'll go really low sugar, they'll stop drinking the Diet Coke, and they'll stop eating the cakes for a few days, so that when they go to the doctor, their fasting glucose has actually come down. So the doctor isn't concerned, they don't have to make any changes, and then they go straight back to eating the junk after the appointment. Whereas with the HbA1c, it's an average reading. So it's like an average 3-month reflection. So you can't really cheat the system with that one. If that's high, that's a sign that your red blood cells have basically become more sugar coated, which isn't great. And yeah, this takes a little bit longer to come down. It can also be impacted by things like your iron levels, but it's just a good reading to check in on, and it's usually done by most practitioners. And there's something called a complete metabolic panel. So this is looking at things like your liver enzymes. That's what I said before. If your liver starts getting too much glucose in there, that overspill, then it will convert to fat and triglycerides. So that can show up as fatty liver, and in very severe cases, when it's long-term, things like liver cirrhosis. A lot of alcoholics have this, because if you remember, alcohol is a form of glucose and sugar. When it enters the body, it's not just problematic for other reasons, it's also got a lot of carbohydrates and sugar, and it's purely just that. So there's also things like bilirubin, creatine, some of your minerals can be involved, and obviously glucose. So some practitioners do a complete metabolic panel. I would also recommend a full thyroid panel because of the interconnection with your thyroid gland in all of this, and I've got a whole slide on thyroid in a second, and a HTMA. All of you would have done this, so the hair tissue mineral analysis is really useful overall because your minerals are the spark plug, so they give you that cellular energy as well, and a lot of them are involved in your mitochondrial function. So your mitochondria has a lot of need for things like minerals, especially if you remember on that second page of the report, there's a ratio called the calcium magnesium ratio. You can always go back and look at what yours is afterwards. And an imbalance there can be a sign of a blood sugar issue. And also your potassium status is really important too. Because if you've got low potassium or a potassium loss, indicating like a need for more potassium, then you're going to struggle with taking that glucose from the bloodstream and transporting it to the cell. So when I was saying before that there's an issue with insulin resistance and the lock and the key, before that glucose has even got to the cell, it requires potassium. So when you eat, your blood sugar raises, and then you should have plenty of potassium to carry that sugar to the cell where it meets insulin and it gets allowed in to the cell. So yeah, many different connections here. There are other functional lab tests that can be useful, more as indirect markers. So you could always test your cortisol directly and see what's going on with your stress with a Dutch test. And there's a few other markers on there. So if you have some sex hormone imbalances because of that connection, you might be struggling with low testosterone. You might have high DHEA level. So that could indicate maybe some metabolic connection. If you do a stool test and see some imbalances on there, or a urine organic acid test, there are some specific mitochondrial markers on the OAT test and also ketone markers. So if they're elevated, that's a sign that you're not really processing your fats well for energy. But if you're interested in more of the lab stuff, then you can always message me afterwards. But I definitely say these are the most important and the most like accessible. So what can damage these locks? So it's kind of like you've got the insulin there, the blood sugar's there, but the key cannot get into the lock. It's like it's stuffed with chewing gum. So you can do all of the turning in the world, but something's blocking it. So some of the things that can damage locks are basically the same things that can damage other cells of our body. So we just want to be mindful of these things in general. So excessive intake of polyunsaturated fats and trans fats. So we don't really want to be eating any fats, trans fats, sorry, in our diet. So this is man-made. This is not genetically, but this has been modified in a lab to create these fats that are solid a lot of the time. So a lot of processed food, a lot of chips and crisps and cakes have trans fats in there because they last longer on the shelf and they're cheaper to use, basically. And then polyunsaturated fats aren't inherently bad. They have been getting a bad rap online recently where it's saying that we have to avoid all of them, but I definitely don't agree with that because there's some healthy foods like nuts and seeds and oily fish that could fall under that category too, but there's a spectrum. So there's polyunsaturated fats that are on the healthy good end, so things like nuts and seeds, oily fish, salmon, but then there's ones on the more harmful end, and seed oils can be put into this category too. So seed oils are primarily polyunsaturated fats, so canola oil, rapeseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil. We want to avoid these as much as possible, but it's not possible to completely avoid them because we have to just live our lives, so we don't want to be fearful of them. But something like salmon has polyunsaturated fats plus some omega fats, and it has some like saturated fats as well, so it's more blended, whereas the rapeseed oil is basically just pure polyunsaturated fat, and yeah, it can be quite inflammatory when we consume it in excess. Chronic inflammation can damage the locks, so there's a few different things that go into this. Chronic inflammation can be caused by stress, it can be caused by these other things, toxins, poor gut health, infections in the body. Just this low-grade fire in the body can cause a lot of damage to our cells and therefore our insulin receptors. Nutrient deficiencies, we need certain nutrients for healthy, strong cells that do their job. So if we don't have enough like vitamin D or cholesterol or magnesium, our cells just aren't working, so they don't get the messages properly. So the key's there, it's ready to go. The insulin's like, let me in. And just because your cell isn't working properly, it can't allow the glucose in. So we end up with a basically starving cell. Even if you're eating plenty of food, our cells are starving for energy and can't make energy correctly. Toxins can damage our cells and our locks, heavy metals, mold, and glyphosate, which is a pesticide commonly used on foods these days. This is why long-term organic food is a top priority. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's absolutely worth it. And the food is actually more nutritious. So in terms of calories and the amount of protein in your beef, it's going to be the same. But in terms of nutrients and antioxidants and like omega fat balance, that's all going to be different. That's all going to be more beneficial if you get a grass-fed beef, organic beef, versus a beef from the local like supermarket, local grocery store. And then endotoxins stemming from our gut can cause a lot of inflammation, chronic inflammation, which can damage the locks and damage our cells. Okay, so mitochondria. So these are the energy powerhouses / batteries of the cells, and we have trillions and trillions and trillions of mitochondria in the human body. Muscle cells have the most mitochondria because they are the most energy intensive. They require the most energy, especially the heart and the cardiovascular system, which has around 5,000 mitochondria in every single cell of that. So a cell then makes up tissues, which then makes up organs. So that just blows my mind. And really interesting, mitochondrial DNA is actually inherited from our mothers only. So it comes from the maternal line. So our general DNA comes from mum and dad, and then that makes us. Whereas mitochondrial DNA, our energy potential and our batteries and these factories of our body only comes from our mum. So I don't want any of you ringing your mums and blaming them for your fatigue issues once the call finishes. But this is why for like us as women, if you want kids in the future, if we can do everything that we can to optimize our health, it does make a huge difference. And interesting, another thing that I found is that your mitochondria are actually of bacterial origin. So they started off thousands of years ago as bacteria, and then they just morphed and changed and transformed to become these living, working like factories, which is so like crazy. So this is why antibiotic use can be so detrimental to our mitochondria and our energy. So a lot of people with diagnosis of chronic fatigue have had like heavy antibiotic use in the past. The muscle tissue is actually an organ. So it's actually one of the largest organs in the body. The skin is number one, I think. That's kind of like debated, but yeah, your muscle is an organ. So it secretes anti-inflammatory compounds and cytokines, they're called, like chemicals, whereas adipose tissue, which is fat tissue, secretes pro-inflammatory compounds when in excess. So we all need to have some level of fat, so it's not that we need to have 0% body fat to be healthy. A normal amount of fat is healthy and protective, but when we are carrying excess weight, it becomes a vicious cycle. So we end up with higher insulin levels, we end up with higher inflammation, and then when our inflammation's high, our cell receptors get damaged, we don't allow the glucose in, and then it just goes round and around, as you can see. So that's why it can be a struggle to lose weight, but once you address it from a holistic perspective, it is possible. Muscle tissue is also supportive to our joints and skeletal system, so it's very protective in regards to aging. So one of the biggest risks when you're older and causes of mortality is fractures, like hip fracture. So having good muscle mass and really prioritizing your metabolic health when you're younger will have an impact on your longevity long term. And your muscle will protect and strengthen your bones. And you really should try to avoid falls and broken bones, because yeah, people, they fracture their hip or break something, they end up in hospital, and then that whole process can be just very stressful, and then sometimes they pick up an additional infection when they're vulnerable, which is pretty sad. But yeah, we can do a lot about it in advance as well. So our body does slow down, and it does require a bit more work, and it's a bit harder to make muscle as you get older. But when you start in your 20s and 30s and 40s, it can carry on, and it's a lot easier to keep the ball rolling at that point rather than just starting when you're 60 and start to see signs of poor bone health. Like, it's not too late, but you could have like put in a lot of work before. You need protein to build muscle. There are 9 essential amino acids that you need to get from your food, and I think it's around, in order to actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis, so to produce muscle, we need minimum, I think the science is 25 grams of protein per meal, but that's minimum. So average, like ideally we want 25 to like 40 grams of protein per meal, but sometimes at breakfast that's a little bit more difficult, or could be. So yeah, 25 to 30 at breakfast, or 25 to 40. And just as a reminder, I'm sure all of you know this, but when I say 25 grams of protein, that doesn't mean the weight of like the chicken breast. So within that chicken breast, there has to be 25 grams of protein, but the actual chicken breast might be like 100, 200 grams. I don't know. You have to look at the analysis of the food. So I've had that question before, so I just want to clarify. And then final organ that I want to talk about is the thyroid gland. So this is the butterfly gland, butterfly-shaped gland that lives in the neck. It produces hormones, mainly T4, and then that T4 gets converted into T3. And this conversion happens mainly in the liver, the gut, and the thyroid gland itself. So this is why with thyroid health, again, everything's connected. Liver health and gut health is super important. And these hormones regulate our body's metabolic rate, growth, and development. And the thyroid also requires a lot of nutrients from tyrosine, an amino acid. So eating enough protein is important for production of thyroid hormone. And then a lot of trace minerals, iodine, zinc, selenium, iron, and some vitamins, retinol, vitamin A, vitamin D, and B vitamins. And the thyroid's also like a sponge, so it's very susceptible to toxins as well. So we want to reduce our exposure to toxins long term, so that's where eating organic, water filters, air filters, all that good stuff that I talk about comes in. The majority of thyroid problems are autoimmune in nature. So this is actually more than just like a problem up here in the gland, it's an immune system problem. So I'd say 9 out of 10 cases of a thyroid issue is going to be autoimmune in nature, and the condition is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So yeah, just a little side knowledge there, but doctors only usually catch a thyroid issue when it's too late. So when that autoimmune attack has gone on for so long that the thyroid gland is actually damaged at that point and someone needs a medication. But I'm looking at optimal levels and seeing how close you are to that. So there are, in this whole like metabolic health, other organs involved that I could have done a deep dive into. So your pancreas and your liver are some big ones, but I just thought these were the most important ones to share for now, but just know there's many more involved. And let's have a look now how our metabolism can connect to our hormones, our gut, and our skin, because no system works in isolation, and we can't not improve our hormones by working on our metabolism. Okay, so the hormone connection. The number one job of your endocrine system, which is your hormone system, is to regulate glucose. That's its number one job. So supply enough glucose to our brain and our tissues. That's its number one goal in our body. So if you're not even doing that properly, if you're not regulating your blood sugar well, there's no way that your body is going to prioritize a healthy period, good fertility, clear skin, nice hair growth, because it's like you're not even meeting my number one need, if that makes sense. So we have to always make sure that the blood sugar is as regular as possible before we start playing about with the hormones. So a lot of you would have come to me with sex hormone imbalances, estrogen problems, period problems, etc., my skin, my weight, my hair, but we always have to come back to the blood sugar first, because hormones don't go out of whack for no reason. They don't just decide to become problems. They're always the end result of a lot of other imbalances. There's never just one, but blood sugar is a huge one that I see all the time. So when our glucose crashes, this signals stress and danger to the body, which can down-regulate and affect hormone production. And then it requires, because it crashes too low, that process of gluconeogenesis, when our body has to make its own sugar, that requires adrenaline and cortisol to raise it back up. So you're tapping into your own stress hormones, just to regulate your blood sugar. And if your body's in this stress state, or it thinks it's in a famine because your blood sugar's constantly dropping, and it thinks, right, there's no food's not going to come because you're fasting, and we don't know when the next meal's going to be because you're eating really like erratically, then it doesn't care if you have a baby or not. That whole fertility side of things gets shut down temporarily because it thinks, I can't even regulate myself. I don't even have enough food and fuel and consistent nutrition to feed myself. So let's not think of a baby right now, because that would be really bad for me to fall pregnant. So it will shut down your ovulation sometimes. You might skip a period, or you just might not have enough progesterone. That's the progestation hormone. So high glucose levels for too long will result in high insulin, which can then lead to a few common imbalances that I see. High androgen levels in women. So these are the masculine hormones. So this is where PCOS-like symptoms come in, polycystic ovarian syndrome, excessive hair growth on the face and body, like abnormal hair patterns, hair loss on the head, greasy thinning hair, maybe in a male pattern thinning. You might have acne, especially on the lower part of the face, this hormonal zone. You might have excess weight, excess body odor, irregular cycles. You might be struggling to fall pregnant. So this is the high androgens, but it can also, high insulin can also lead to high estrogen or estrogen in women. This is where the heavy periods, clotted periods, flooding. You might have PMS. You might have really sore, tender breasts before your period. You might get really bad water retention, cravings. Your mood might be really off. This is a sign of excess estrogen or estrogen dominance. This high glucose and high insulin state can reduce testosterone in men. So it basically just switches us. So men, they get lower testosterone, which is a male hormone, but higher estrogen. Whereas women, we get higher estrogen and higher male hormones a lot of the time. And this state can also promote inflammation. And then the high estrogen level specifically has a knock-on effect on the thyroid. So it can increase thyroid binding globulin, which can then lower our thyroid level. The connection with our gut. So excess glucose can actually feed pathogens like candida and parasite in the system. So it's not that sugar is bad, it's just the amount of sugar or glucose that we have. And maybe it's that we're eating a normal amount, but it's not being cleared properly. It's lingering in the bloodstream for too long because our body's not like processing and digesting it properly. However, we don't want to just starve our body of glucose and sugar by going on this extremely low carb, ketogenic or carnivore diet, because then you might not even have the energy to fight off the pathogens effectively. So there's a balance again. Sometimes you do have to cut back on the sugars, and if you're eating like fruit at every meal, or you're adding syrups and honey to everything, even these natural sugars, if you do have these overgrowths, sometimes you do need to back off, but you shouldn't really be cutting out like sweet potatoes and rice if you can help it, and these gluten-free like carbohydrates, because then your blood sugar is just going to be too low and your body's going to be more in this stress state, and it's just going to slow everything down. We still need to feed our body with some carbohydrates. And then this inflammation and stress again from the spikes and crashes can disrupt things like our stomach acid production, our digestive enzymes. It can affect our gut motility, so it really slows down or it really speeds up and goes looser. And it affects our defenses too. So our defense systems are low, so we're more vulnerable to things like viruses, parasites, and bugs. And our gut basically is our immune system. So this is how it can also affect our recovery from illness, sickness, whether we get food poisoning or not, can again come back to blood sugar. And then last one here is the skin health connection. So when our blood sugar is high, it can promote the production of something called advanced glycation end products, which are shortened to AGEs, which is very fitting because that is how premature aging develops. So the sugar kind of it damages our collagen and our like parts of the skin that produce plumpness and like healthy radiance. The sugar can just disrupt that and yeah, can deplete our collagen levels. High insulin levels can also stimulate sebum, so this oil production of the skin, and also localized androgens, so these male hormones can be localized in the skin, which lead to clogged pores, and that is the start of how acne develops. So all spots start as a clogged pore, but it's not just about whether we're exfoliating or not, it's why is that clogged pore happening in the first place, and that can be from excess sebum and this like inflammation in the skin. And high glucose in the skin or in the body can directly promote the growth of opportunistic bacteria and yeast in the gut and on the skin locally. So you know how our skin is a reflection of our internal health and our gut health specifically. So it can promote the growth of that internally, which will result externally. But also, if we just have a lot of sugar in our bloodstream, it can directly affect the skin microbiome, leading to fungal infections, acne breakouts, even things like perioral dermatitis. And in extreme cases like diabetes, if you've ever seen people, they get these horrible ulcers and wounds on their leg that just won't heal, and they end up getting infections over and over again. It's because there's so much sugar in the bloodstream that they pick up an infection and the bacteria is just eating away at that sugar. And it just becomes so strong that they can't get rid of it without antibiotics or sometimes amputation. This is like very extreme levels, but that just shows the sugar in the bloodstream is the main problem, not the actual bacteria. So what to do about it? I'm sure you're all asking. And this is obviously whilst working on the root causes simultaneously. So some of these tips are very like, try this, do that, like add this food, add this herb, but still the root causes are things that we're going to be working on one-to-one with. So things like mineral imbalances, I'm going to be looking at your thyroid, I'm going to be helping you to heal your gut and manage your stress better. Those are still the root causes. Okay, I'm going to stop that there for now. As I said, if you're like, okay, that sounds something that I'm dealing with, that I'm interested in, what can I do now? Check out my one-to-one program for not only my support, but this full recording, plus a ton of others like this on different subjects. The package is currently called the Root Cause Relief Package, but it is shifting to the Hormone Reset Package. It's still exactly the same with what we're focusing on and what we look at with mineral balancing and your mindset, underlying imbalances that you have, root cause level healing, but it's just had a little refresh and a rebrand. Let me know if you love this episode. Send me a DM on Instagram with any questions. You can find me at Viva Natural Health, or you can email at enquiries with an E at vivanaturalhealth.co.uk. I am currently away on holiday, like I said, but I will get back to you as soon as possible if you're interested in working together. Have a great day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would love for you to leave me a rating and review on your podcast app, as this helps to support the show and it allows it to reach more people with this valuable information. Come and say hi over on Instagram. I'm at Viva Natural Health. And if you haven't already, check out my website, vivanaturalhealth.co.uk, for tons more free resources and to discover how I could support you further. I currently offer one-on-one consultation packages if you want my top level support, then more affordable group programs and self-paced online courses. So there really is something for everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here next week for another episode.